Well, this is going to be a rough episode. So, if you thought David Parker Ray was bad, this one's probably going to be just as bad, if not worse. So, if you just want to come back next week, that's fine. Skip to the end to see who we're going to be talking about. But, I wouldn't blame you. So, we're going to get into it. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week we're looking at the story of Josef Fritzl, who may be the worst person ever. Like I get it. Like, I know Hitler was bad, and on a grander scale, yes, Hitler probably one of the worst people ever. But in terms of just kind of lesser known history and just kind of the subject matter that we talk about on this show, this is probably the worst story ever. So, and look, I've gotten comments from some of you like, it can't be that bad. It is that bad. I don't know why you would doubt me. Like, I get that I have a very cold, sort of indifference to tragedy. I tend to laugh a lot when things are sad, and that's really because it's a defense mechanism. It's not because I'm a dick. This is a really terrible story, and I'm probably going to laugh at certain points in this story as a defense mechanism for avoiding being sad. So, look, man, you've been warned. All right, here we go. Josef Fritzl was born on April 9th, 1935 in Amstetten, Austria. He was an only child and was raised by his mother after his father abandoned the family when Joseph was just 4 years old. Of course, as these stories tend to go, Joseph's mother regularly beat him and taught him to despise men in general. As World War II broke out, Joseph and his mother hid in shelters as the Royal Air Force bombed Amstetten because, Austria heavily under Nazi influence at the time. While they're in the shelter, Joseph actually began having sexual fantasies about his mother, but nothing ever happened, shockingly. He was a teenager, hormonal, started thinking about pork and his mom, but he never acted on it. And you know what? Silver linings here, guys. We got to find them where we can in this story. In 1951, Joseph got a job in a steel manufacturing plant in Linz and developed a reputation as a hard, reliable worker. 5 years later, he married 17-year-old Rosemary Beyer and moved back to Amstetten with his mother and his new bride. Now, thanks to all of the Nazi influence that Joseph had become a huge fan of as a child, Joseph really enjoyed the fact that Rosemary was easily manipulated and easy to control. Her parents weren't too happy about how controlling Joseph was, but they really tried their hardest to get along with him. In 1959, shortly after Joseph's first daughter was born, he was arrested for exposing himself to a woman in Linz. Now, this was his third arrest up until this point, and one of those prior arrests had been for attempted rape. Despite that, Rosemary didn't seem to care, and they had a second child a year later. Joseph then decided to leave the family behind to take a job working on radio installations in Ghana. And while there, he had several mistresses, but made sure to only choose, quote, nice girls out of his fear of contracting a sexually transmitted disease. So again, guys, silver linings. Like, is he cheating on his wife with a bunch of Ghanaian people? Probably. That's probably how you say it. Yeah, sure he is. Of course he is. But guess what? He's being considerate. All right. He's being smart. He's using protection. All right. He is choosing his affairs wisely so that he doesn't catch an STD and then go back home and give it to his wife. Guys, he's really not that bad. I was kidding. All right. This is not going to be a bad story. This is a good guy. All right. In 1963, Joseph returned to Amstetten and the couple had their third child. He also got his old job back at the steel factory and commuted between Amstetten and Linz. 3 years later, the couple gave birth to their fourth child, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is a key figure in this story. In 1967, after several years of habitually making his bald man puke in the butches of Amstetten, if you know what I mean, Joseph attempted... that's such a great phrase. Joseph attempted to drag a woman into those bushes and rape her, but she escaped. Charges weren't ever filed, but he attempted to rape this woman, but didn't work out. On October 6th of 1967, Joseph climbed through the kitchen window of a woman he had been spying on and raped her while her husband was away. He was quickly arrested for this and given an 18-month sentence. Despite Rosemary's parents begging her to take the kids and leave, she stayed loyal to her husband. And because he had built such a good reputation in the community with his volunteer work, despite the fact that he was a creepy pervert rapist, Joseph actually had no problem finding a new job once he was released from prison 6 months early for good behavior. He was quickly promoted to technical director at his new job, which manufactured concrete sewage pipes. Even more, Joseph and Marie had 2 more kids. And with such a large family, Joseph decided to move his wife and kids into this 3-story building where his mother had been staying. They then had a 7th child, and at that point, Joseph decided there were too many people in the house, and he locked his mother in the 3rd story and left her there to die, going so far as to brick the window shut so she couldn't see any sunlight. And here we are at the hard left turn into, this is bad. Like, that's his own mother, which, I don't know, maybe she sucked. I don't know. When Joseph wasn't working, he was visiting brothels and developed an even deeper desire for complete control over another person. In 1973, he purchased a 3-story converted barn with 4 bedrooms, 3 terraces, a restaurant, and a bar that he opened as a vacation property. Soon, everyone who was able in the family was helping run this like Airbnb type place. Joseph had so much success running the property that he purchased several more properties, working as a landlord on the side. In 1978, Joseph met a man named Paul, who invited him down to Thailand to do all of the dirty things people do down in Thailand. The 2 stayed in Pattaya, which is this little fishing village that had become a notorious sex haven for creepy perverts. So, man, right in Joseph's wheelhouse here. And although Paul, when he was asked about it later, claimed that nothing happened, like, come on, guys, you know everything happened. All right, you don't send a convicted rapist to a city known for wild, rampant sex and expect him to not do anything. Get out. Oh, you're an idiot. After returning from Thailand, Joseph turned his attention to Elizabeth, who by then was 11 years old and considered the prettiest of Joseph's children. After Rosemary left her children with Joseph to vacation with some friends in Italy, Joseph took Elizabeth down to the cellar beneath their home and raped her several times. Although Elizabeth began showing up to school with bruises and just a new sullen demeanor, no one did anything because guess what, guys? In Australia at this time, child abuse was very legal and very much widely used. So it sucked. When Joseph wasn't raping his own daughter, I have to put emphasis on it. He was putting her on a Scheitelnein. I think it's called a Scheitelnein, which was a sharply cut wooden log that basically you used to force someone to kneel on until their knees bled. Come on, guys. He also poured uncooked rice on the floor and made her stand on it barefoot while she balanced a heavy book on her head. If the book fell, Joseph would whip her. Now, when I read this, I was thinking to myself, just a bunch of uncooked rice that probably can't hurt that much, right? It would actually probably feel kind of good, but I'm not going to go try it. No, I'll take his word for it. Maybe it's excruciatingly painful. On November 6th, Joseph received a permit to make alterations to his home, which included modifications to the cellar. And over the next 4 years, Joseph used government money to build what he claimed was a domestic nuclear fallout shelter. He built secret entrances and doors to additional rooms that went completely undetected when inspectors came to review the work. But guess what? It wasn't really a nuclear fallout shelter. It was going to be a torture dungeon. Yay! By 1980, Joseph's abuse had extended from Elizabeth to Rosemarie, who just kind of continued to let it happen rather than leave because she's an idiot. Their three oldest children, however, had smartly left the home and had little desire to return. And this left Elizabeth as the oldest child remaining, which is really unfortunate. The next year, Joseph got Elizabeth a job at a roadside diner so she could learn how to be a good cook. He also enrolled her in a hospitality course at a nearby college. Although her true desire was to be a cosmetologist, she was just happy to be away from her father for any amount of time. However, anytime she came back home, Joseph would restart raping her all over again. If you couldn't tell, though, he's sending her off to do all these things to try to groom her to basically be a servant or slave, sex slave. On January 28th, 1983, Elizabeth finally broke down and confessed to a coworker everything that had been happening. The coworker convinced Elizabeth to run away with her to Linz and then go on to Vienna, where there was a reduced chance of her being caught. And they did. And this is great. Elizabeth is going to get away, and this story's going to kind of have a happy ending, maybe. No. When Joseph found out, he got Interpol, the international police people, to launch a manhunt for her. She was found 3 weeks later after police were called to the apartment she was staying at for a noise violation, and Joseph picked her up the next day and took her home, probably raped her some more. The next year, Elizabeth celebrated her 18th birthday and was preparing to finish her hospitality course. She had made plans to move in with her older sister and finally try to live a normal life. She even had a job lined up at an upscale restaurant in Linz and had even fallen in love with a student cook named Andreas Krujic, and the two were making plans to run off together, be married, and have a happy life. But guess what? Joseph had other plans. The day after she finished her exams, Joseph and Rosemarie showed up and took Elizabeth home, preventing her from running off with Andreas. And for the first few weeks, Andreas was writing these impassioned love letters that Joseph was intercepting and reading. And the contents of these letters filled Joseph with so much jealousy, and he vowed that no one other than him was going to have his daughter. On August 28th, 1984, Joseph walked into Elizabeth's room and told her that she needed to help him move a heavy steel door downstairs to the cellar. That's not true. When they got to the entrance of the cellar, Joseph pushed her inside, smothered her with a chloroform-soaked rag, handcuffed her, dragged her through seven different doors in the cellar, and then threw her onto a bed in the middle of the floor. While she was unconscious, Joseph raped her several times before leaving her in complete darkness, locking all 8 doors on his way out. Joseph returned a few days later to rape Elizabeth again, and she tried to fight him off, but Joseph was just too strong. She tried to scream, as you would, but Joseph had soundproofed all of the rooms in the cellar. He then tied a 6-foot-long extension cord around her waist to give her enough room to use a makeshift toilet he had installed in a corner of the 15 by 15-foot cellar. So it's basically just like a bedroom size room that in total darkness with a toilet and a mattress. That's it. For the next few weeks, Elizabeth stayed in complete darkness. The poor ventilation restricted the amount of oxygen she received, making her even weaker. And Joseph visited the cellar several times each day for more rape and just to give her scraps of food to keep her alive. Eventually, Elizabeth stopped fighting and just kind of resigned herself to being her own father's sex slave. Like, what? I told you this was bad. I told you it was going to be bad. God, this is his own daughter. She's like 18, 19 years old at this point, but it's still a father and a daughter, and it's going to get so much worse. All right. A month into Elizabeth's captivity, Joseph brought a pen and paper down to the cellar and forced her to write a letter explaining that she had run off to join a religious cult. The letter, addressed to her parents, told them not to come looking for her or else she would leave Austria forever. Joseph then took the letter, drove 100 miles to Branau am Inn, which, if you paid attention in history class, would know that was Hitler's hometown. And he totally did that on purpose, I'm sure. Drove 100 miles to Branau am Inn and mailed the letter back to his house. Somehow, Rosemarie apparently hadn't even noticed her daughter had been missing for a month before the letter arrived. Like, it's just how oblivious this woman is. To make sure that no one suspected him of anything, Joseph made several trips to the Amstetten police station to complain about investigators not doing enough to find his daughter. It's like, hey, you guys, you don't know where my daughter is. I don't know what accent that is for Austria. I don't know how Austrian people sound. Oh, wait, no, Austria, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Hey, you guys are not doing enough to find my daughter. Even though he knew exactly where his daughter was. Oh, this is going to be bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impression for the rest of the show. That's how I'm going to lighten it up. He also gave very emotional interviews to various newspapers and television stations pleading for Elizabeth to come home. You know, it's like, Elizabeth, you need to come home to your mother and your father. I know you're really just in the cellar right now getting raped by me, but you need to come home. No one knows where you are. Anyway, eventually, Rosemary and the other children living in the house gave up trying to search for her and just kind of returned to a normal life. They just assumed she was gone forever. On April 16th, 1985, which would have been Elizabeth's 19th birthday, Austrian officials called off the search. To celebrate, Joseph released Elizabeth from the extension cord so she could walk freely around her dungeon. He also began bringing her new clothes and other small presents, and he kind of kept her up to date as to what the rest of the family was up to, and he even stopped beating her. So that's great, but he also stopped using a condom and started trying to get her pregnant. All right, anyway, just want to let that sink in for a second. Back on the surface, Joseph made it very clear to the family, as well as the many tenants that came and went as Joseph rented out the extra rooms of the house, that no one was to go near the cellar under any circumstances. And because everyone was really scared of him at this point, like he was a dick. He was a terrible person. And everyone was scared of him and everyone listened to him. They didn't want to incur his wrath. Even as he began to spend more and more time in the cellar, claiming to work on a new project that would make them rich, make the family rich, no one ever questioned what he was up to. In September 1986, Elizabeth finally got pregnant. Fortunately, I mean, I guess if you can even say that, she miscarried after 10 weeks. And Elizabeth, already devastated that she was pregnant from her own father, became inconsolable and contemplated suicide. But Joseph, in the delicate way he went about things, tossed the miscarried fetus in the trash in front of her and left Elizabeth alone in the darkness to cry it out. Whew. Yeah. It's just so bad. So terrible. And it's going to get worse. In 1988, 4 years into her captivity at this point, Elizabeth got pregnant again. And when the baby bump got too big, Joseph lost his attraction for his daughter and stopped raping her until she delivered the baby. So, on one hand, great. We love it when fathers are not attracted to their daughters. Awesome. It would be ideal if it wasn't because they had gotten them pregnant and they were kind of fat. But you know what? We're going to take every victory we can right now. Joseph, even for a while, stopped visiting altogether, just coming down long enough to drop off some food. When the baby came, he forced Elizabeth to deliver her own baby by herself. So Elizabeth's half-sister daughter, Kirsten, was born on August 30th, 1988. And Joseph waited 10 whole days after her birth to make his first visit. And after meeting his daughter, Joseph told Elizabeth that as his new wife, it was the beginning of a new big family that they would have together. And that's weird. That's not something you say to your daughter. All right. Pretty high up on the list of things you don't say to your kids is, hey, daughter, you are my wife now, and we are going to have more children together. No, you don't say that. That's weird. All right. I don't have a daughter, but even I know that's not a thing you say. All right. Even worse, while Kirsten sat in the corner of the room doing whatever little babies do, Joseph resumed his regular rapes. He drove to other towns to buy baby supplies, but never took Kirsten to see a doctor. And because of the lack of medical care and growing up in a dungeon, Kirsten developed epilepsy and would have it for the rest of the time that she was in the dungeon. 2 months later, Elizabeth got pregnant again, giving birth to a half-brother son, Stefan, on February 1st, 1990. 2 years later, she gave birth to another half-sister daughter, Lisa. And having given up on the possibility of ever being released, Elizabeth begged Joseph to expand the dungeon, and he eventually agreed because he felt like it was getting a little weird having 3 babies sitting in the corner watching him rape his own daughter. And yeah, that's pretty weird. That is pretty weird. And so sometimes you just got to make some adjustments and expand. But rather than use tools, he made Elizabeth, and then later when the kids were old enough, he made them dig out tunnels and extra rooms with their bare hands. Eventually, they had separate chambers for sleeping, cooking, and washing, plus a rubber-padded rape chamber, and the entire project took 10 years to complete. All right? Yeah, she was in captivity for at least 10 years. At least 10 years. Guess what? It's going to get so much worse, you guys. A few months after Lisa was born, the third half-sister daughter, Joseph realized that he could get a substantial grant from the Austrian government if he just adopted his own daughter. So he made Elizabeth write another note saying that she had gotten pregnant in the cult and already had Kirsten and Stefan, but the cult frowned upon her having more than 2 children. Therefore, she was leaving Lisa on their doorstep for Joseph and Rosemary to take care of. Joseph then took the note to the Amstetten police and asked for a DNA test and handwriting analysis. 5 days later, the Youth Welfare Office granted Joseph and Rosemary temporary custody during the formal adoption process. Social workers even visited the house several times, but no one ever questioned anything, especially about the cellar. And because Joseph's prior sex crime convictions had been wiped off the books because of the 15-year statute of limitations in Austria, adoption officials had no idea what Joseph's past even looked like. On February 26th, 1994, 10 years into the captivity at this point, Elizabeth gave birth to another daughter, Monica. 3 months later, the adoption was made official, and Joseph began receiving $23 a day, along with an additional $230 a month in benefits for the adoption. And this is the adoption of Lisa. By December, Joseph had taken Monica upstairs and proceeded with the same adoption process. But this time, Joseph called Rosemary from a payphone pretending to be Elizabeth, and Rosemary totally believed it. Like, how dumb are you? How dumb are you that you can't recognize when your own husband is mimicking your daughter's voice? You know, it's like, Rosemary, it is me, Elizabeth. It is not your husband, Joseph. No, it is me, Elizabeth. I still in the cult, and I keep having babies, but it's okay, because I know you're going to take care of them and be good parents. Like, what? How dumb? Like, seriously, how dumb can you be? Anyway, oh, God. Anyway, this time, however, instead of formally adopting Monica, Joseph and Rosemary acted as her foster parents because Joseph had also learned that he could get even more money from the government if he just was a foster parent. Meanwhile, down in the cellar, Elizabeth, God bless her, man, she's teaching her busy children, or she was busy teaching her children how to walk, talk, read, and write. She kept them occupied by crafting models from glue and pieces of cardboard. She read them stories and sang them lullabies. And even though, even more, because those kids didn't know any better, Elizabeth convinced them that life in this dark cellar was how everything was. Like how normal life was. Like, I don't know what kind of crazy story she could have told her or told those kids, but it's like, no, this is life. You know, this is life. We sit in a dark room and, mysterious man, husband, father come down, give us food. And, he's busy up there in the post-apocalyptic world. The Great War took everything. The Americans, they bomb everything. The Americans are evil, and there used to be so much things, but there is nothing anymore, and we just live in the cellar now, and that is life. God, that's crazy, so crazy. On April 29th, 1996, Elizabeth gave birth to a set of twins, Alex and Michael. However, shortly after birth, Michael developed a serious respiratory issue, and Elizabeth pleaded with Joseph to help save his life. Instead, Joseph gave her a bottle of aspirin and said, "Oh, what will be, will be." It's so cold. Just like, here, give your kid some aspirin. Let's see what happens. Michael died 3 days later, as it's not surprising. And when Joseph came down and found out about it, he tossed Michael into the incinerator that he used to burn the rest of the house's trash. Like, I just like, I hate laughing at that, but like, it's just so cold. I mean, technically it's really hot because it's an incinerator, but like the move itself is cold and just so bad. To try to get Elizabeth's mind off of it, he then brought down a radio, a television, and a VCR, along with a fish bowl and some goldfish for Stefan to observe. However, rather than let the children watch educational videos, Joseph told the kids to stay in another room while he watched porn and forced Elizabeth to wear lingerie and act out the same scenes that he was watching in the pornos. And that's not good either. That's just bad. And if that wasn't bad, on August 3rd, 1997, Joseph took Alex upstairs, put him on the doorstep, Alex being the surviving twin, put him on the doorstep and went through the same charade of fake Elizabeth carelessly abandoning another baby so she continued life in the cult, blah, 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 blah. Now, with one adopted child and 2 more foster children, Joseph was collecting nearly $4,000 each month from the Austrian government. And unlike the 3 people living in the cellar below, life for Alex, Monica, and Lisa were actually pretty good. I mean, if only comparably. I mean, like, Joseph is still living upstairs in the house with them, probably being abusive and all that to them as well. In February 2002, we are now 18 years into her captivity. Literally half of Elizabeth's life has been spent in captivity. Elizabeth got pregnant for the 7th time. She gave birth to Felix in December of 2002, with Joseph telling her that Felix would have to stay in the cellar with them because Rosemary couldn't handle taking on another kid. Even worse, Elizabeth's health and appearance had begun to deteriorate. Her teeth had begun falling out, her hair had turned gray, and both of those things caused Joseph to practically lose all attraction to her. And with Elizabeth losing favor in his eyes, he then turned his attention to Kirsten, who by now was 13 years old. The following year, things really started beginning to fall apart for Joseph. He struggled to find tenants because he had become a very difficult landlord to deal with. And when he began falling behind on his commercial loan for the properties, he started setting them on fire and actually collected $20,000 in insurance money. This guy, I swear to God. 3 years later, Joseph and Rosemary celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The town of Amstetten even honored the Fritzls with a special party where the mayor and several other prominent residents gave glowing tributes to what they thought was the city's model couple. And I mean, look, if your idea of a model couple includes one person raping his daughter for 29 of the 50 years that he was married to his wife, then yeah, I mean, sure, you're on the same page. But like, how insane is that? Like, like my grandparents have been married for over 50 years. And if word got out that my grandpa had been keeping another person in a cellar locked up and had been fathering children with her for my entire life, basically, I would, like, my whole world would turn upside down. And this dude had an entire city completely fooled. It is incredible. Like, it is mind-boggling. By 2007, a 72-year-old Joseph had lost all of his sex drive. Thank God. Partially because Elizabeth and Kirsten were brutally unattractive, which that's just facts. All right. If you leave someone in a dark cellar, giving them barely enough food and food that's not even nutritionally valuable, they're not going to look very good. All right. That's science. I'm not being mean. I would expect nothing less. All right. But also, you know, he's just getting really old, and just your wiener stops working at some point eventually, some sooner than others. For reference, Kirsten was now 18 years old. had never seen the sun or eaten a healthy meal in her life. And having no real reason to keep them down there, Joseph actually considered killing them all. But he feared that he wouldn't be able to do it without getting caught. So on Christmas Day 2007, Joseph produced another letter from fake Elizabeth saying that she was giving up life in the cult because of years of poor treatment, which would ostensibly explain how awful she and her kids looked when they arrived. And the letter stated that she would be home in 6 months. However, Kirsten wasn't able to last that long. In April of the following year, Kirsten's seizures had become more frequent and more severe. She had a complete breakdown and began ripping clumps of her hair out. And in full protest of the living conditions, which she had recently learned were not actually normal, she stuffed all her clothes into the toilet to block it up. So now the cellar is getting real messy. Health is becoming a real concern. It's coming to a head here. On April 16th, which was Elizabeth's 42nd birthday, she has been in captivity since she was 18 years old, and she's now 42. Elizabeth begged Joseph to take Kirsten to the hospital. With Rosemary off in Italy on her annual vacation with her friends, Joseph thought he might be able to sneak Kirsten to the hospital and get her back to the cellar without anyone noticing. So 3 days later, Joseph finally relented and decided to help. But because he was too old and weak to get her to the hospital himself, he got Elizabeth to help carry Kirsten to the cellar entrance before forcing Elizabeth back down into the darkness and saying he'd handle it himself. But rather than take Kirsten to the hospital, he put Kirsten on the doorstep and left her outside while he went in and called an ambulance, who then came, picked her up, and drove off. 3 hours later, Joseph drove to the hospital and met with Dr. Albert Ryder and handed him a fake letter from Elizabeth. The letter talked all about the cult and how Kirsten had been left at the doorstep. But after giving Dr. Ryder the letter, Joseph just kind of drove home, where he was met by police. All right, cool. Something's about to happen here, maybe. But rather than arrest Joseph, he just told police the same thing he had told the doctor, and figuring there's no way that Joseph had kept this woman in a cold, dark cellar for her entire life, all 18, 19 years of her existence. There's no way that's 100% even possible, right? The police thought that, and the police left. Police kind of bought the story. Like, someone being in a cult and being treated terrible in a cult and almost dying in a cult was more believable than someone being locked in a dark cellar for almost 20 years. It's insane. 2 days later, Dr. Ryder called Joseph and told him that Kirsten's condition had worsened. She had experienced multiple organ failure and that she was near death, and the doctor pleaded with Joseph to get in contact with Elizabeth so they could find out what had happened and potentially save Kirsten's life. Well, on April 25th, Elizabeth and Stefan were watching the local news in the cellar when the broadcast showed a picture of Elizabeth as a teenager and Dr. Ryder appealing to her to contact the hospital so that they can save Kirsten's life. And this is the moment where everything turns. When Joseph visited her in the cellar later that night, Elizabeth confronted him with what she'd learned and begged him to let her go save her daughter. The next morning, Joseph made a deal with Elizabeth. And basically, in return for her and her children's freedom, she would continue to tell everyone that she had been, continue this lie that she'd been living in a cult for the last 24 years. And Joseph said if she ever betrayed him, if she wavered from that story in any way, he was going to kill her and the kids. And later that day, Rosemary, Alex, Monica, and Lisa had their entire lives turned upside down when Joseph brought Elizabeth, Felix, and Stefan into the living room. Like what is that conversation like? He's like, "Hey, our family, this is going to be kind of awkward, but here's some more family. Remember Elizabeth? Rosemary, you remember Elizabeth? She was oh, this accent hurts my throat. No, but I'm going to power through this. I, Rosemary, you remember Elizabeth? She our daughter. Guess what? She and I have a daughter too, and some kids. These kind of your kids. They're your half daughter, grandson, daughters. I don't know how it works. Anyway, say hi. Yeah. Oh God. Anyway, that night, after introducing everyone, Joseph took Elizabeth to the hospital where Dr. Ryder questioned her about Kirsten's illness. When they were done, Dr. Ryder let Joseph and Elizabeth leave the hospital, and against Joseph's orders, like Joseph told Dr. Ryder, do not call police about this. But Dr. Ryder thankfully didn't listen, and he called police anyway. Joseph and Elizabeth didn't even make it off the hospital grounds before they were intercepted by police and taken to different rooms for questioning. Initially, they thought Elizabeth was just a terrible mom, but after several promises that she would never, ever have to see her father again and that her children would be protected, she finally revealed the truth. And it took her 2 hours to tell the story, and by the time she was done, doctors had 8 pages worth of notes. With more information than they were probably prepared to learn that day, police went back to Joseph's room and got him to confess to building the rape dungeon, locking Elizabeth in it, having sex with her, even though Joseph said it was all consensual. We know that's not true. When asked if he had any regrets, Joseph said that he didn't, and he had actually given Elizabeth a good life by saving her from drugs. Like, how delusional? How delusional can you... It's like you raped your daughter, kept her locked in, kept her locked in a dungeon for over half of her life. And you think you gave her a good life by protecting her from drugs? Drugs! Not American imperialism or nuclear war or, I don't know, other legitimate things that people had problems with at the time, but drugs. Okay. Police weren't buying it, and Joseph was arrested. Back at the house, police went in and brought Felix and Stefan out into the world for the first time. And this is kind of a touching moment, man. Felix screamed with joy when he saw the moon, and he even asked if the moon was God and if he had gone to heaven. Like, aw. That's kind of sweet in a ignorantly innocent sort of way. On the car ride to the hospital, the two boys even tensed up when they saw a car coming in the opposite direction, afraid that it was going to crash into them because they didn't understand how highways worked. Like, I remember being in that position, when I was like 5 or 6. Like, I have vivid memories of like driving home at night. Well, I wasn't driving, obviously, but riding home with my parents at night on like a dark 2-lane road. And like, I would get a little nervous when I saw a car up in the distance because, if it's far away, it looks like it's in your lane and coming right at you. And then like kind of at the last moment, it would look like it would get out of the way. So like, I totally can relate to that. When they arrived at the hospital, they and their mother underwent extensive treatment for their malnourishment. They were all anemic. They lacked vitamin D. They had awful immune systems. They all had lost their teeth, and they were all walking with a limp because I think in the cellar, like the roof or the ceiling wasn't very high. And so they all had to like slump down and like learn how to walk weird. Felix, who was 5 years old at the time, hadn't even fully learned how to walk yet and crawled like a monkey around the room the entire time. So while Joseph awaited trial, a team of over 300 officers investigated the cellar. Kirsten continued to cling for life in a medically induced coma, and Elizabeth and her children spent a ton of time with psychiatrists and really like learned how the world really worked. Elizabeth had to really catch up on what all she had missed over the last 2 decades and change. The kids had to learn everything. Like, it is crazy. Police and hospital staff did everything they could to protect Elizabeth and her kids, but the public wanted to see them. Obviously, very curious about these people. At one point, there was a $1.5 million reward for the first picture taken of Elizabeth, but no one was able to capture it, which is good. Like, give people some privacy. Like, I get it's intensely fascinating, but don't be mean. It got so bad, actually, that the Austrian government called in their anti-terrorism unit to protect them, which resulted in the arrest of 17 different photographers. And that's awesome. All right. I hate the paparazzi when they just like go around harass celebrities. Like, that's not fair, man. Let people live their life. On May 15th, 2008, Kirsten awoke from her coma and after several more weeks in the hospital made a full recovery. The entire family was relocated to a villa on the hospital grounds where they could settle into a new normal routine. Elizabeth, smartly, broke off all contact with her mother, who had been too ignorant the entire time to stand up and do something about this situation. However, there's still one lingering problem here. Because Austria had really stupid laws, Joseph was only looking at a single 10-year sentence if convicted. Like, all of the horrible things that I have covered, because Austria's laws were so stupid, Joseph only stood to go to prison for 10 years. But smartly, lawmakers pored over Austria's law books and found an obscure law regarding slavery, which carried a much more severe penalty of 20 years. That's better. Not great. It's better, though. But after hearing Elizabeth's testimony, Joseph was actually ultimately convicted of murder, rape, slavery, incest, and abuse, and he was given a life sentence. And that, thankfully, is the end of Josef Fritzl's story. So you made it. You made it. That's pretty good. That's a great job by you. Yeah. So that's that story. Was it worse than David Parker Ray? I think so. David Parker Ray maybe murdered people. We don't know. But he raped a lot of people in the most, extreme, brutal ways. Possibly even did the same to his daughter, but at least he let his daughter, go out and have a normal life, normal-ish life. Josef Fritzl literally took, over 20 years from his daughter's life, fathered 7 kids with her. Most of them survived, kept 2 of those kids locked in the basement with her. Or 3 kids locked in the basement with her. Just insane. So yeah, let's see. What did we learn? What did we learn, you guys?
What did we learn?
Number 1, Josef Fritzl kidnapped his daughter and held her captive for almost 25 years. She was 18 when it started. She was 42 when she was finally let go. Number 2, he fathered 7 kids, got her pregnant 8 times, fathered 7 kids. 2 of those kids died. 3 of them were brought up to the real world, where Joseph made as much as $4,000 a month from the government, while the other 3 stayed down in the dark dungeon as creepy little mole people or whatever. Number 3, at least as of this recording, Josef Fritzl is still alive, rotting in prison. Hopefully he has a very slow, excruciatingly painful death. I'm honestly surprised that someone has not beaten him to death yet. Because, look, if I'm in prison and that guy shows up, he's dying day 1. Like, there's no excuse. There's no rationalizing what he did. I'm honestly surprised they didn't come up with a death sentence in Austria for him, because if there was ever a reason to give someone the death sentence, this is it. Next week on Our Weird World, it's going to be a big palate cleanser. This is a story I can almost guarantee you that you have never heard before. It is the story of Dave Sanders. Who is Dave Sanders? He's just a dude. He is a dude who wanted to save the world. And he also really thought that he could make a real life superhero action movie out of his life. And he did not do that. And his story is really crazy. And there's a bunch of weird pieces to it. And so we're going to look at that one next week. We're going to move on from this terrible story. Thank you for listening. Tell all your friends and keep it weird.